birdie num num. Birdie num num. Birdie num num. A birdie num num.
What kind of artist was Peter Sellers?
Peter was great. Peter was a genius. He was totally committable.
Having the birdie num nums.
It's like going to the dentist. While you're in the chair, you think, I'll never recover from this. And Peter was like that. It was like you go through lots of root canals, but there's going to be this payoff that will be so wonderful that that stays in your memory.
Michael, what was it like to live with and be the son of a genius?
Well, it had its magic. It had times when it was tremendous, great fun. I mean, and it had its ups and downs because, I mean, genius as a, if you look at it, it's a very fine line in genius, and it can go to madness.
If you keep it a secret, why didn't you tell the world, eh?
We had a scene where I come in the door with a bottle of champagne and he had to turn towards me and he had his gun in his hand, and unfortunately he pulled the trigger, which he wasn't supposed to do, and I got little blood spots all over my face from the blank.
Oh my God.
So I thought, then people started saying to me, oh, he's not a very nice man. And I said, oh, well, it's just an accident, you know. But then they started going on about it, and I started thinking, well, did he do it? Did he dislike me or something? And I got a bit paranoid.
Peter Sellers was this incredible presence who could go into character and never come out. You know, you thought, oh, that's who he must really be, because he could maintain it. I'm not sure what that was like to live with, probably hell.
It was very easily sparked off from one mood to another. You could just say the wrong thing and that was it. He'd blow up like a storm. And she said at the age of 8, she remembers me on the telephone humoring my father with the full knowledge of what saying the wrong things could do in the way of reprisals, should we say.
Just a word would set him, wouldn't it?
Oh, just a word, not even that. I mean, like when he'd get on the phone, he'd say, I knew how, I'd have to gauge his mood instantly. Right, and if he got on the phone and said, hello, Michael, there was trouble. If he said, hello, Mike, it was fine.
Well, listen, how do you think I feel about it? Can you imagine how I feel about it, Dimitri? Why do you think I'm calling you? Just to say hello? Of course I like to speak to you. Of course I like to say hello.
He's not a joke teller or anything like that. He's a kind of an organic guy who grows into any situation. You know, you could be coming down in an elevator with him, and all of a sudden his idea of a humorous situation, he'd be coming down, all of a sudden he comes into his Indian accent.
Pay no attention to me, sir. I'm merely spectating. Oh, bye.
He'll keep on that. Now he come back at you as an American.
There's nothing to figure out, General Turgidson. This man is obviously a psychotic.
The camera, I think, has to be on him, and he has to be a character.
What kind of suit you call that, fella?
What do you mean, suit? This happens to be an RAF uniform, sir. And I am Group Captain Lionel Mandrake.
Was there ever a Peter Sellers, I wonder?
I think that was what made him such a great comic actor, to an extent that he creates himself as a vacuum to be filled by whomever he is portraying.
He liked my accent and he wanted to talk like a Bronx person. And so he asked me to get a prop man or a grip who spoke with a heavier accent than I had. And I put him in his trailer, and 10 minutes later, he had him. Because Peter, you know, came from the radio.
For his part, he always maintained he didn't know what he was like. He didn't know, when said, what is the real Peter Sellers?
Well, I was going to ask you that. Well, you've asked him, who was the real Peter?
Well, I mean, the man I know is my father.
Yeah.
Indoors, I say that he did exist. He says he doesn't, or he didn't.
Well, he really said that, didn't he?
Yes, he claimed that he didn't exist. He claimed he was a mixture of all of his characters that he'd ever played.
Now then, Dimitri, you know how We've always talked about the possibility of something going wrong with the bomb. The bomb, Dmitri. The hydrogen bomb.
Oddly enough, I had watched some of the production out at the studio, Shepperton, or wherever it was being shot. Peter Sellers doing all of those roles, and I remember that going out one day and he was being Merkin Muffley as the President of the United States on the phone to the Prime Minister of Russia, explaining what this little accident that's happened, unfortunately, and nothing serious, of course, and trying to talk it away. And I went back 5 weeks later and he was doing the close-up. He was still saying the same lines. And you realize, again, about filmmaking, the persistence of a performance over many, many weeks, as well as many, many takes.
He played the President of the United States.
That's right.
And then he played the man next to Sterling Hayden, trying to stop him. Mandrake, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, Mandrake.
I shouldn't tell you this, Mandrake, but you're a good officer and you have a right to know. It looks like we're in a shooting war.
Oh, hell. All the Russians involved, sir?
A lot of that was shot in the IBM building in London. I went down there, it was, you have to go in there, and it was all like, you had to have passes to get in, and you had to take your shoes off and put these soft shoes on and all this kind of stuff, bring no dust in. It was quite interesting down there, and then the rest was shot in the studio a lot.
Our doomsday scheme cost us just a small fraction of what we've been spending on defense in a single year. But the deciding factor was when we learned that your country was working along similar lines, and we were afraid of a doomsday gap.
This is preposterous. I've never approved of anything like that.
Our source was the New York Times.
Dr. Strangelove, do we have anything like that in the works?
A moment, please, Mr. President.
His creation of Strangelove was funny and nightmarish. Do you know anything about how your dad developed that character? Or was a lot of that Kubrick?
Kubrick, I admire him tremendously. For one aspect alone, his detail in films, like the B-52 interior was exact in detail and everything worked. Every dial, every gauge, and it read correct. It didn't just read something, anything.
No.
I mean, he's fanatical for that kind of detail. And they put the character together.
Long discussions with Stanley Kubrick?
Yes, I would
to get that many, developing the one arm?
That's one of my father's additions. He would have come to that in character, in scene, and in the same way as in many of his films. It would come to him as he was working, and it would have taken it in the first shots, and they would have kept it in,
Of course, it would be absolutely vital that our top government and military men be included to foster and impart the required principles of leadership and tradition.
Well, everything in that film is brilliant. It's like one of those strange home runs, all improvised in that scene, because you can see Peter Bull, who plays the Russian ambassador, breaking up. There's one wide shot where he kind of, as Peter's doing this.
Also, when they go down into the mine, everyone will still be alive. There will be no shocking memories.
And it never got in the way of the story or the storytelling. It never became show-offy.
No.
Because he was so sincere and three-dimensional in every character he played that it was like the perfect lesson of how to do that kind of work.
What I've always regretted about Dr. Strangelove is that he didn't play all of the parts that he was supposed to have played.
Well, boys, I reckon this is it. Nuclear combat toe-to-toe with the Ruskies.
But I think is a satiric look at the nuclear threat that hung over all of us at that time. In its own way, it was frightening, even though you had this comic picture of Slim Pickens riding the A-bomb and wave his 10-gallon hat and whoopee. People who think that you should have done more seriously, like Fail Safe, which we can talk about. But I think that in its own satiric way, it was just really terrific because it essentially addressed the madness, the insanity of the whole nuclear conflict.
You mentioned the ratio of 10 women to each man. Wouldn't that necessitate the abandonment of the so-called monogamous sexual relationship? I mean, as far as men were concerned.
Regrettably, yes. But it is, a sacrifice required for the future of the human race. I hasten to add that since each man will be required to do prodigious service along these lines, the women will have to be selected for their sexual characteristics, which will have to be of a highly stimulating nature.
The marriages, Anne Hayes was your mom, Britt Eklund was number 2.
That's right.
And?
Miranda Quarry.
Yes.
Number 3, and then Lynn Frederick.
But he was crazy about Sophia Loren, wasn't he? And then Liza Minnelli.
Liza with a Z.
Absolutely potty over her.
Yeah.
It's hard for a son to judge, but he must have had a tremendous amount of sex appeal himself, though, for the ladies.
Yes, he undoubtedly one of the greatest charmers. I know he could charm any lady, just about. There was very few that turned him down.
It was great until Peter decided to kind of, even though we never even had a kiss, he wanted to get married at that time. He was very unhappy because of an episode or something happening in his life, which is nobody's business, really. And he thought I was the chosen one. And I felt very chosen. The only thing is, at the time, I had met my ex-husband already, and I was in his hands. So Peter could never quite really get over it, and then turned around and married that Swedish lady.
She sounds like an interesting person.
Actually, I get on well with Britt.
Yeah.
I like Britt.
But your mum sounds the most tremendous of all.
Oh yes.
There are scenes in there, gosh sakes, I'll get funny thinking of them, where he would be all excited with Britt, and then take her home to your mom, his first wife, and say, how do you like her? I mean, he was looking for approval from Anne, his first wife?
Oh yes, well, one of the funniest ones was he took Liza, he brought her up to where we were living.
It's Liza.
Liza.
Yes.
And we were there, and he brought her in, they spent the evening, and then he got to chatting with Mum, and she said, he said, what do you think? He said, she's nice. And his comment was, well, I always liked her Mum.
Peter Sellers is famously known for being quite difficult to work with. How was it?
That's an understatement. He was very difficult to work with.
And pretty peculiar, too. I mean, he had his things. I remember once we were working one evening, and we finished, and I said, well, why don't we go over to the set and rehearse tomorrow's work so we can light it, So George goes, George Roy Hill says we go over there, and Peter walks on the set, and he looks around, and he says, oh, I can't work in this set. So George says, why? He says, it's green. He says, yeah, I wanted it green. He says, I can't work in green. I cannot work in green. I just can't do it. So George looked at me and says, what do we do? I says, well, I'll tell you what, go rehearse over there. We'll map out the set. We'll put it down on chalk. And we'll repaint the set, and tomorrow we can work. And Peter said, no, you got to tear the whole set down. And then you can paint it another color. So we just went, whew, and that's what we did.
My manner of dealing with Peter was, I was first a great fan. Secondly, I was intimidated by him. Thirdly, I didn't want to do anything to set off arrhythmia of the heart. So when Peter would go into one of his arias from one of his interplanetary arias and I didn't know what was going on, I just became very still and very quiet and let him go through it and then let it run out. And then it would run out, and people who were around him would pretend that nothing had happened, and so would he.
He did go to a psychiatrist in the early days. They were trying to persuade him to go later on, like last year, even before he died. And I had a long chat with him in Switzerland. And he said, look, they want me to go to a psychiatrist. What do you think about it? Because when I was young, I was sent to a psychiatrist. And I said, well, I hated every minute of it. And I only went there under duress. And I said, I don't think he did anything for me. And I said, look, if you think a psychiatrist can do something for you, well, fine. If you don't, then you're wasting your money and time. And he agreed with me. He said, I don't want to go. I said, well, don't. For heaven's sake, your position, you should be able to call the shots,
You always had to bear in mind that the important thing is what we finally have on film and what our film is going to look like. And was there some way to have gotten the great contribution that a Peter Sellers made without going through that? Well, we found that there wasn't. And so we and his director, Blake Edwards, we suffered that.
have a film like The Party where you have Peter Sellers in what may be one of the most controlled and brilliant comic performances in the history of cinema, where every nuance of that performance, as absurd as it becomes, is an example of how to make comedy out of what seemed like such a flimsy fabric.
They'd come into a scene with some kind of format set out in the script and rewrite from there on. They'd set up the scene how it should be, and then he'd start, and then in the middle of the scene he'd break up. He'd just start laughing. And he would start, and I could always tell when everyone could tell when he was going, because he's fatal for that. And you know what happened? He's had a thought, right?
Yeah.
Some funny thought for the scene. And he breaks out, and the trouble is, when Blake also knew that, and then Blake would be on the floor.
Blake Edwards, isn't it?
Yes. Blake would be on the floor, he would be on the floor, and it would take like half an hour, and they'd get back to some sensibility again. And they'd introduce it, and then when they introduce it into the scene, they'd break up again. And,
they had a lot of fun then.
Oh, yes. But as I say, a lot of the funny scenes got written that way, on set.
I've always, when I view comedy, enjoyed the physical pratfall, the so-called slapstick. And I'm always the one that spots the unusual slapstick moment that's happening out there. If it's a guy walking across the street when I'm shooting on Rodeo Drive, and for some reason he creates my attention, and he, was looking at, oh, what's that, and walked right into a parking meter, and all the people around me saw me convulse, and what the hell is he laughing at? And there's a guy over there trying to pick himself up. It's cruel, but it's funny.
No matter when you watch The Party, there's something that the hair on the back of your neck just sort of stands up and in. Why is that? Because it's partly a caricature. He's channeling another culture and a certain cliched stereotype of that culture into his performance.
You are you not, Wyoming Bill Kelso, the famous film star?
That's me, in the flesh.
Oh, God, what a moment in my life. Oh, sir, I've seen every one of your films.
Oh, well, that's
what an honor to me.
wonderful, wonderful.
Oh, what a wonderful strong grip you've got.
Oh, yes, I do.
Goodness, I would have been disappointed if you hadn't crushed my hand.
I tell you something about that. He's very popular in India. I've had more East Asians, more Indians who come up and say, "Birdie num nums." A friend of mine went off to an ashram somewhere, and the yogi was doing imitations of Sellers. So I don't know whether it's, God, he meant well,
Being there, it took some 10 years to get to the screen. He first read it about 1970. It was introduced by a friend of his. He said, read this, it's a tremendous book. And he fell in love with it on the spot. Rung up Jerzy Kosinski and said, I want to buy the rights, but he could never get anyone to take up the project. And all during this time, it was like the character fermented and brewed.
I remember Hal having a conversation with Peter very early on, because Peter supposedly had an aversion to the color green. And of course, it's about a gardener, and Hal said, Peter, you are going to be in a greenhouse, and Peter just laughed. I mean, I guess it was for effect. My thought is that every actor, when they're doing a role, working with a director, and doing a role that they really want to do in a project that they think is worthwhile, the BS kind of stays behind.
He had a heart condition We knew that. And he lived in this beautiful, beautiful home up in the mountains in Switzerland. You looked out over the valley, and it was great. And he said that he lived up there for the air because anything would bother his breathing and his heart and so on. So people who smoked had to, I smoked at that time, people who smoked had to go out on the balcony and close the doors and smoke on the balcony. This was before that became routine in America. People had to do that, and it was all for Peter. And then at night, after dinner, Peter would want to go down to the local disco where you had to fight your way through the smoke to get in, and he would go out on the smoky dance floor and disco dance until 3 o'clock in the morning, as if there were no tomorrow.
I was at work, and Sue Evans, his secretary, rang me up and said, "Father's had a heart attack, come down to the Middlesex. He's in there." So I literally just took my overalls off, hopped in the car and went down there. Now, they wouldn't even let me in. And, so I've come here, my father's had a heart attack, I want to get in. I said, "Are you going to let me in or I'm coming in?" I said, "You've got 2 minutes to make a decision." Anyway, they rushed off and got someone who knew me, and they came out and said, "Right, let him in." And we're in this dingy little place, and in those circumstances, I wished if I had a gun, I'd have shot some of those pressmen.
There were certainly some ironies, though, Michael, weren't there? Your father was married, was it 4 times?
Yeah.
And his last wife was Lynn Frederick. And he was planning, I gather from your book, to divorce her.
Yes.
All had not gone well, but there had been some brief, and I guess he had removed her from the will.
Yes.
And then there was a brief reunion.
Mm-hmm.
I guess to appease her, he put her back in. Is it $4 million?
About $6 million worth.
$6 million?
Not in cash property and whatever he had,
And you and Sarah and Victoria?
$2,000 each.
Oh,
we only got that because the lawyer said to him, "Look, if you don't put anything in the will, you have to put it in to show you actually thought of that this is how you planned it, because otherwise we would claim he'd forgotten."
Yeah.
And so he had to put in a sum, and that was the sum he put in. Paid my rent, I think.
One of the most important decisions a movie maker makes is to either make or not make the movie, and the same with an author about writing or not writing a book. Why, Michael?
Well, I felt it was necessary because this will carries a stigma, although it had no explanation with it. And it carries a stigma from him to us. And I felt it's necessary for me, and more so for my sisters, for us to make a statement about our life, for people to understand what he was like. Because quite honestly, if he lived 3 months longer, it might have been different, because his will literally was seasonal.
So will you please say hello to the folks that I know? Tell them I won't be long. They'll be happy to know that as you saw me go,